So I'm actually taking my oldest son on a 25-day trip coming up here soon where we're going to fly to Asia. The mindset of fear, sacrifice, and scarcity has been tried, and it has failed. It's time to shrug the idea of sacrifice, embrace value creation and abundance, and enhance your quality of life today while building wealth along the way. Welcome to Sacrifice Shrugged of the Wealth Labs podcast, where you can turn your thoughts into profits and build the life you love. Part of this is a whole legacy concept that Rich Christensen, that wrote Zigzag Principle, and you've had him speak. Sure. And he takes his kids on these trips where he can really bond and connect with them. So I'm taking him. He chose Asia, which is cool because I taught English in Korea for 3 months when I was 18, which is just, the reality is someone told me I could go to Korea and be a model. I'd end up being a teacher, right? and just the level of vanity it took for my mind to think, let me go to Korea. I'm 6'3", 200 pounds. And I'm going to be a model for these Koreans? Like, where in my mind did I feel this was?
Somehow I don't think your sample size for
people are like, oh, dude, you get paid like $500 an hour. I never did any modeling while I was over there, right? And I end up teaching English. And I mean, I'm teaching English to preschoolers and kindergartners, then Daewoo executives. I'm just taking any work that will come my way. But I'm going to take him to Korea and show him around there, which I think will be kind of cool. And then I think we'll probably hit like Hong Kong or Tokyo, but then I want to go to like Cambodia, and Vietnam, and I want to show them like third world.
Oh yeah.
And I want to show them how people in third world countries can be truly happy, but also have them understand the bubble that he's living in.
Oh yeah. I did that with my son when he was 11. I took him on a mission trip down to the Dominican Republic, and it was very interesting, actually. I thought profound because there's about 100 of us there. We're all chiropractors. We adjusted, I think, 57,000 people in a week. We were working day and night. My first assignment was I went to a jail and adjusted all the inmates, and then, orphanages and all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted him to see we were in Haitian villages. I mean, you talk, and he brought some balls with him. He'd get the kids around, try to get them playing and so on. And I thought it was a really, really good experience. So we'd all convene every night at the end, and on the I think it was the last night or second to last night, they asked him to get up and say, hey, can you share what your experience was? And I was thinking about, he's going to understand the kind of privilege he has and, all that kind of stuff. And it was the most profound thing. He said, kids in the Dominican Republic aren't that much different than kids in the United States. They just want to play and have their parents love them. And I literally, you could have heard a pin drop where everybody's like, wow, that's what he observed. And it was a really cool thing to observe.
So as you know, I've been doing a lot of deep work this year, like 6-hour therapy sessions.
Yeah.
And one of the insights that I had was, one is just that I think it's so essential for kids to feel unconditional love, that it's not something that has to be earned. It's just something that is, right?
Right.
But the second thing that I recognized in my life that was super instrumental was, I think it's amazing for everyone to have at least one person in their life that irrationally believes in them before they have any evidence of what they could do.
Which is sort of the unconditional love thing.
Right.
Although I talked about, defining terms, and this is one, because I know what you mean by unconditional love. I know what most people, what they mean.
Doesn't mean that there's no consequence. It doesn't mean that there isn't.
But it also, I think technically, or, if we really examine the words, I don't think there's a such thing as unconditional love. I think the condition is it's your kid. In other words, there is a condition that creates that feeling of that now I can love this person unconditionally, but there's a precondition to that. But ultimately, I think what you're saying is really critical, is saying, hey, I'm your father. You are my child. And so now there is this sense that I believe in you. I love you.
Right.
There's all those things that follow.
And I think if that person that believes in them, hopefully it's their parents, but if they could have someone outside of their parents, I feel like even more powerful, because sometimes my kids will say to me, well, of course you're my dad. So you're saying that.
Right. And that's the whole point in the sense of saying that's the precondition, saying that my dad's supposed to do that. But thank God they have a dad that does that, because there's a lot of dads that don't do that.
Totally. And I think of like a couple incidences and circumstances growing up. Like, one is we had this neighbor. She was much older. Kids were growing up, and I was just a little kid, and her name was Anna Mae Webb. And I would just go over there as a little kid, take my little Tonka trucks or whatever, and I would just jab her. And she just loved on me, just, smoked her cigarettes, told me I should never smoke, and, and how bad it was. And her husband would bring in garden tomatoes, but I still remember that just feeling loved, just feeling accepted, right? And then I think about my grandfather taking me from the time I'm 5 and showing me how he works on TVs and taking me back to his shop and taking me on, drives in the rain or taking me over to one of his customers' houses, because even though he's a coal miner, he had 2 side businesses.
Right.
One was he played the accordion, which I get it. He's Italian. It's almost like a rite of passage.
That's right. Yep.
And so he'd play in this band and they would go perform for weddings and stuff like that on the weekend. And then he would repair TVs, those Zenith TVs, those big, heavy pieces of furniture. But I saw people in the community give him tamales in addition to payment, right? And they knew each other and that kind of stuff. So I think that's where my fascination with entrepreneurship came from.
Yeah.
Is nobody treated him that way because he was the manager at the tipple at the coal mine. Mm-hmm. People treated him that way when he was doing things that he loved, like playing the accordion or working on a TV, because I see him in the shop and he had all these things and he could pull out these boards. And I remember him telling me not to touch something. And this is when you knew I was an entrepreneur. As soon as he left, I touched that and shocked the hell out of myself, Pat. I was just like, oh,
capacitor, yeah.
Yeah. But I still feel those moments. I still remember those moments. I still remember when he was concerned about me starting my business, but when I showed him, it was September 13th, 2001.
Wow.
So, because I remember it just because it's 2 days after September 11th. And one of my mentors became a client. Mm-hmm. And this was a substantial amount of money that came in. I think it was like total 6 figures, but that day was like $72,000, right? So I'm just out of college. September 11th just happened. And I remember showing him my bank account just to say, hey, it's going to be okay. And I don't think a day passed. He didn't grab me by the shoulder and get teary-eyed when, because I'm like breaking this chain of like, it was fearful for them because he didn't want me to be hurt. He didn't want me to be at risk. He didn't want to see me suffer, and it felt risky to do that because his dad tried to be an entrepreneur in Italy and it didn't work out.
Yep.
Now he had different circumstances, they're in San Giovanni and Fiore. That's pretty close to, that's really far south. I think there's a lot of mob influence down there.
Oh yeah.
And then
coming from an Italian family, I experienced what that is. Yeah.
I like when people go, Gunderson, that doesn't sound very Italian. Oh, it's not. That's why the family's from Norway and Ireland,
right?
But the Italian side, Iaquinta, that got changed to Iaquinto when he came over. But and you're more Italian than me, but I'm actually a citizen.
Yeah. Well, and that's that's
you might have more Italian blood
that I paid
in
to get
you.
me to citizenship, and he disappeared. So I got to start over.
I remember when I got dual citizenship, I happened to be in San Francisco getting it, and Joe Polish, our mutual friend, was there, and I said, "Oh, I'm just here getting this passport." And he goes, "What is it?" And I sent him a picture of my Italian passport. He goes, I don't know what it is, but I'm already jealous. I just think it's really cool. You got 2 passports.
Joe would be jealous of anything you had that he didn't.
Which is great that he said that because then my wife, I used the passport when we went to the airport and she's like, you're such a douchebag.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Look at my Italian passport.
I think it's cool, but I grew up in an Italian family, so that's why I think it's cool. So, we sit here and, I love hearing these stories. In my mind keeps going to certain implications. What if I'm listening to this? What would I be taking away from her? What would I be considering, or what questions might I have? So, I'd love your opinion on this, or see your point of view. So, you talk about the nurturing and circumstances of your youth, your grandfather and his influence, that he had, the smoking old lady and the influence that she had, et cetera.
Yeah. And then my mom with discipline, and taught me responsibility, which created a lot of this life,
So do you think that entrepreneurs are born, or are they raised, or is it both, and how much of one versus the other?
I think it's both. I think that there are those people that are just born to question everything and be renegades. Mm-hmm. And I have always had a little bit of that in me, right? But I also think that we are more inclined to be entrepreneurs without the education system that makes us fearful of being that way. Mm-hmm. We're trained, taught, and educated from the time that John Dewey created the school system, which was designed for 80% of people to work on an assembly line. Mm-hmm. 17% of people to be dropouts and then do the work that no one else wanted to do, even below that. Mm-hmm. And then 3% of people room for entrepreneurship. And so I think we get conditioned to think that entrepreneurship is risky. Now, I think that entrepreneurship has become more cool and become more of a thing in society today. But the downside to entrepreneurship is some entrepreneurs are trying to fill the void of their earlier life and prove that they're worthy.
They're driven. Yeah, they're
lovable,
driven by that. Yeah,
that they're accepted. They got a chip on their shoulder, almost like Michael Jordan had this chip on his shoulder to get championships, and he used bulletin board material to get upset and go out there. You know, I think some entrepreneurs, and it becomes detrimental sometimes because they become judgmental, because it's just they're outwardly judging others based upon their insecurity.
Not only that, but then when they do succeed, they still can't enjoy it.
No, because
it was
they
a
know
negative
someone
motivation
else.
that got them there.
Yeah, and they know someone else that's more successful than them. And
it doesn't fill the hole.
They
It
still
doesn't
don't
solve
love
the problem.
themselves.
Exactly.
Right. They still don't feel worthy.
Yeah.
They still haven't healed something from the time they were a kid. And I think a lot of our pain comes from just things that happen when we're kids that gets unresolved, or that we develop the wrong philosophy.
Right.
We learn the wrong lesson. We, you know, and you know, I think about whether it was me being hit by a car, whether it was me not memorizing my address to get back a art project that got thrown away by the teacher that made me feel stupid, to the time that I felt alone when I was in Korea, to the time I yelled at my mom when I was 15 to get my way and hurt the person I loved the most at the time, right? Like these kind of things. Or, I mean, hell, to get really deep, like the time that this kid, when I was, I don't know how little I was, but I wasn't even in first grade yet, and I wrecked my bike trying to get away from him because he was molesting me, right? Like those kind of things. If I don't deal with those, I look at my 20s before I dealt with those. I was trying to fill a void that was unfillable.
Yeah.
More money, more prestige, more notoriety. And I think we get these trappings of societal success, and society doesn't value the things that are in this podcast studio to the same degree they value the person on the cover of a magazine,
right?
Or the same that someone exits a business or goes public, or like you don't get the same notoriety that, you know, because okay, you made Wine Revealed, you're a damn exception to the rule, but ultimately, because you know a lot about wine and enjoy that with your family, that isn't the same, you know, they're not putting you in the cover of a magazine for that, like they might if you sold a business for certain multiples. And, you know, so there's a lot of times we chase things simply because we're trying to fill a void that's unfillable, and that creates entrepreneurs in some cases.
Yeah.
Right? High school dropouts, a lot of them become successful entrepreneurs because of that chip on their shoulder. But I find that if we can enjoy the journey along the way, create a life worth living, determine what a win is based upon our terms, not society's terms, and just deal with some of the things in our past, and as cheesy as it is, find ways to love ourselves more.
Yeah.
That's the game. I feel like life's a game of figuring out how to love ourselves.
It is. In the end, it's you know, I think finding fulfillment, and you can't start there. I think, you know, you figure that out over time. But like I look at, looking at myself in my first business, I can remember was 7th grade, and I'm a guy that I went to my French class in 7th grade, and I would bring candy with me. Mary Jane's, I remember, and Twizzlers. That's, you know, and I'd have people say, "Hey, you know, can
Mary
I?"
Jane's.
Yeah, you remember those, huh?
No, I just think of it as a totally different thing now.
Yes. I wasn't selling that type of Mary Jane in 7th grade. These little peanut butter things. So, and then it just occurred to me that people give me like a dime for it or whatever, because, you know, I had to go to the candy store and buy it. And I said, And it literally occurred to me, go to the grocery store, rode my bike to the grocery store, and I bought the big bags, you know, and then I sold it out by the piece. And I made money every single day in French class in 7th grade. And it was like, I loved that. And it felt good. And it was, so I guess what's the point is that I look back and I say, at that point, I was always observing things and figuring out ways to make a business out of something. And so I think some of that is just wired in me, you know, just genetically. But then I think there's other things that influence you along the way. It is some combination of both. And that's why, like, when I looked at your early childhood experiences, or, you know, people who would be watching this and listening to this podcast, you're wondering, you know, is this right for me? Is this right for my kid? Is this right for whomever? You know, can I be an entrepreneur? I think to a degree, anybody can be. I don't think everybody should be. You know,
totally.
And how do you know? And what are the things?
Rich Christensen has a good thing in his Bootstrap Business book, mentioning him again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where he talks about what if you're buried and all you have is a straw to breathe through. He says entrepreneurs can handle the straw test.
That's right.
Non-entrepreneurs don't handle that straw test.
That's right.
And if you can't handle the straw test, don't be an entrepreneur, be an intrapreneur.
Yeah.
Work within an organization and take your skills and create upside potential. And I think that's the key. If everyone was an entrepreneur, this would be a train wreck world.
Oh, it can't be.
We've got to have entrepreneurs and employees and, you know, and I think anytime entrepreneurs look down upon someone that's not, that's an internal flaw, not a societal flaw.
And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, we have a mutual friend that created a project called the Billion Entrepreneurs, and he's like a really great entrepreneur and has a passion around it. And his definition I thought was very interesting, though, because it's the same thing. It's like, can everybody be an entrepreneur? Can there be? He said, an entrepreneur is anyone who takes responsibility, right? So you can be working in a company on whatever level you are, but if you will take responsibility for outcomes, right. I should finish that. Take responsibility for outcomes. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you're taking responsibility for outcomes in a really big and important
right.
way. And as far as he's concerned, that's an entrepreneur. So I believe that understanding, you know, entrepreneurial behavior and having the self-image of being entrepreneurial, no matter what it is you actually do, because this is about who to be, right? So I don't care if you are a stay-at-home parent, mom or dad, if you are a mid-level manager in a company, if you work in a coffee shop as a barista, if you're someone who can accept the premise that I take responsibility for outcomes, and whatever the scope of that is, whether it's just how good the coffee is I just made versus how this child is going to be raised, that's still an entrepreneur. And I believe that anybody could benefit from these types of conversations if they want to take responsibility for outcomes.
And I found that where I'm choosing to love people from a distance rather than, you know, have this whole category of friends, mm-hmm. friendlies, and buddies. Mm-hmm. So friends, I say yes to their invitations anytime I can. And when I can't, I let them know, please keep inviting me.
Right.
And I invite them to things.
Right.
And, you know, incidentally, that's when you said, oh, man, it'd be great to have you out to Total Solutions, but it's a week and a half from now. I was like, well, this is going to be an amazing relationship. Let's find a way to make it happen.
You just showed up. That was, amazing.
Right. So then the second is friendlies. So friendlies are people that I choose not to spend time with. If I run into them, I'll have a cordial conversation. I don't share my vision. I don't go deep into my life. I never make a commitment to them.
Kind of like an acquaintance.
Yeah. Like my...
Somebody just came to mind?
Yeah, my wife's ex-boyfriend, before I dated her, you know, I ran into him and I talked to him and it was a nice conversation. And then he said, we should do lunch sometime. And I just put my hand on his shoulder and I said, that's never going to happen. You know, it's like, why shine that on, right? It's like, he doesn't want to. He's just trying to be. So that's the friendly.
But do you know that he's home right now still thinking about that?
Yeah. And then the third is buddies. Yeah. And so buddies are people I'm not sharing my vision with, but I enjoy spending time with.
Right.
Like I just hung out with two of my buddies. We went elk hunting and we just talked about girls from high school. We talked about, you know, who's still married, who's divorced, who looks good, who's aged, like, and just inappropriate conversations that we just laughed, yeah. You know, and like, those are great. I want to spend most of my time with friends that I'm expanding my vision, supporting my vision, happy to see me succeed. Right. Some of my time with buddies, which just is relaxing, rejuvenating, and kind of fun, and just completely minimize my time with friendlies because I used to try to change friendlies.
Right.
Try to place my values upon them, try to convince them otherwise, try to, you know, and I'm spending so much energy and I'm having a level of frustration. I used to speak at this event and this guy introduces me the first time and he says, every other faculty member at this event is this guy's client. He owns all the skyscrapers in Utah. Pat, I owned 45% of a 3-story building. I don't even know if that's a skyscraper and that's it. Everything else was single level. And then I don't know if any of the other faculty, maybe one or two, maybe two, mm-hmm. but there's other faculty there that time, like Tony Robbins. I never even talked to this dude. So he's definitely not a client, right? So he's lying. And I get up and I go, I don't know who got introduced. I look forward to meeting them or becoming them, but I don't know who that was. And so I have this deep conversation with him. Like I'm grilling him. He's like, I'm so sorry. That'll never happen again. So I come back the next time as a faculty member, I'm speaking, he introduces me, but this time it's more even. It's just more insane. Because he remembers I'm from Utah. So he goes, and he doesn't know enough about Mormonism because he says that he knelt down and prayed with me and my wife. Now, he could be confused and think I'm Jesus. I get that. But the bottom line is that didn't happen. So I go have a conversation with him. And when I would come home from these things, my wife would be like, you're so exhausted. Like, you're not even here. You're just exhausted. I'm like, because I'm fighting a battle versus finding a flow.
Right.
And it wasn't a battle worth fighting. I'm trying to convince a sociopath or a psychopath or whatever.
Somebody can't help themselves.
Right. You can't so I just removed myself from the equation. Guess what? Life got better.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where I came up with friendly. Mm-hmm. Like if I see him, I'm fine having a 2 to 3 minute conversation and moving on.
Yeah.
And if he invites me to something, it's going to be a polite decline.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I think that's a graceful way to do it. My wife plays doorman a lot in our life. You know, she's fiercely protective of our time, because, we do.
You have more best friends than anyone out there. A lot of people want your time. That's for sure.
And I love being with people. I love relationships, and I think that's where the richest of life is.
But she's really intelligent to know when your generosity becomes crippling.
When you're
violating
the context of this podcast, she knows when it becomes sacrifice. I'm now trading something of greater value for something of lesser value.
Right, because who would you rather hang out with her?
It could have been time with us together. It could have been time with somebody like you. That's a true friend.
It could be her, and you would choose her over me, and I 100% would support that.
That's right.
Just like I would do the same with my wife, and you would support it. My good friend Aaron, I'm always like, hey man, I'm ditching you tonight.
You talking about Aaron?
Aaron. Sorry, I know it's confusing.
I don't know who Aaron is.
And he's like, I get it. Yeah. Hoes before bros. I mean, that's a terrible statement, I get, but it's like my wife over my friends. All right, that's what we're really saying. But I'm sure I'm gonna get slammed for saying that.
Yeah, well,
my wife laughed.
Yeah, well, you know what? And it's what works in your house. Yeah. Hey, look, my wife came
it's
up with
so far from the truth as far as what she is that it's funny, right? Like,
yeah, but nobody...
we become defensive when it's close to home. That's what I found.
Well, people listening to this might not know, so I'm glad you put the qualifier in there. And this is, I think, in the end, it's you and I were out here at your cabin, hanging out and talking about, just
which is worth the money. This is my best manifestation of what I've created in the world, letting me enjoy it on a daily basis.
I had a little walk through this morning, seeing what you really developed out here. Because, my attitude was, I think I want to own things. I'd rather just, rent and go visit. But I'm seeing how you got this place set up for you. There's no way you could rent this. You've now built your podcast studio.
Got our legacy crest up above the mantle.
It's literally a home. It's not a escape.
We're creating traditions.
Yeah, so the value that you're creating here for your family and the enrichment of your life.
It's a catalyzer of connection.
I didn't get it, necessarily in the beginning, and in a sense of it wasn't like I thought it was wrong. I just didn't get it, like you, because you had a lot of excitement about it, and I'm like, yeah, it's cool, And I rent cabins sometimes, and we go away, but I didn't realize what you were really building.
And I want you to get it because you've added so much to my life from a standpoint of when we met. You're like, hey, do you ever eat dark chocolate? I'm like, no, I eat milk chocolate. Why? Because as a little bitch, I just ate super sugary, rush my, you're like, dude, this is a little bitter, but it's going to be, you don't chomp it down. You ease into it. It's satiating. And then you're like, have you ever had red wine? I'm like, my dad drank red wine from a box. I'm like, and you're like, look, let me introduce you. Right. So you started to bring those satiating experiences to my life.
Right.
Then when I was first married, we'd order drinks. My wife would order a beer and I'd order a strawberry daiquiri, and they never placed it in the right place because I had the sugary strawberry daiquiri, which is just embarrassing and girly. And she had the beer, but it's because I didn't understand everything was a rush for me. Yeah. Everything was immediate, and it wasn't about experience.
Right.
Because I was in a rush to get back to work. I was in a rush to make more money. Everything, and taking 2 months in Italy a couple years ago, there's no rush there.
That's right.
They are masters of quality of life. I didn't drink coffee before then, and you said you didn't really drink coffee till you went to Italy. Then I started to understand that ritual. I started to understand that experience, and now we even have our kids have a little bit, in the morning. Not our oldest doesn't like it as much, but the youngest does, and we'll have conversation. We bought a little record player. You might even play that some mornings, right? So that we kind of have this experience on our terms, not just life telling us what to do, not just something blaring in the background or rushing to the next thing.
It's interesting, how I think the best teacher in the world for our kids was travel.
Our kids stopped being afraid of things.
Yeah, we homeschooled them for years, and seeing different cultures, how things go. And like you said, in Italy, you don't rush anything over there. You're not rushing for the check over there when you're sitting at a restaurant.
You tell me, you're like, when you tell me you were in France and you offended a waiter once asking for the check.
You would think I called his mother a whore. We're literally, we're sitting at a sidewalk cafe, and a lot of the French can be arrogant. My French is pretty good once I'm there for a little while, enough that I can
I'm an
converse.
idiot. I was speaking Italian in France. and they're speaking it back to me better than I'm speaking it as an Italian citizen, because I know 10 words that are the most important words to know in Italian. Yeah, I'm that guy.
Oh my God, that's funny. And so it was. We had a place to get to. It was during Tour de France. A friend of mine was on the bus, who was working with the team, and he said, "Hey, you can come right now and get on the bus." So I'm like, so I'm literally sitting with the food still in front of us. And I go to the waiter, I ask him for the check in French, and normally, they treat you pretty well. But he looked at me like I just called his mother some kind of a horrible name, and I realized, it's like it's about like you're rushing out of here is basically an insult to us, an insult to our food, and and you're one of those ugly American kind of things. And in Italy, see, the difference is, and trust me, I love French wine, food, language, culture, but I'm Italian. And in Italy, they make it so you would basically say, I don't care about going on the bus. I'm sitting here enjoying this meal. They just make the experience so loving, so beautiful, so warm, and you just want to hang out there. You learn to just be that, and it reminded me of my childhood because I grew up in a very Italian family. So it's but ultimately, I think that, when you talk about bringing your kids there or bring some of that back home. We traveled a lot with our kids all over the world. So when we're back home, bringing some of that back and bringing it into that household, I think is extraordinarily enriching. And this is where you say you blur the lines, getting back to how's this tie into being an entrepreneur and shrugging sacrifice and the values, value creation, the things that we're talking about here in this podcast, is that when you see that you can travel for your work, if you will. I would speak all over, in Asia, all over the world, and you can then say, well, you know what? Most people would say I'm in conflict now. I have to leave my family, leave my kids to go give a talk in Paris, to go give a talk in wherever you're going to give your talk. And now I feel like there's this conflict. My career and my desires in my career have me want to go to these places, get in front of these audiences and do the speaking. But then my family's behind me, which is how I did it for a while until I finally had to change some of my premises. Philosophy saved my life, saved my, my marriage. If I didn't understand premises and contradiction and I didn't know how to resolve the pain I was in, I think it all would have torn apart. I think my health would have been gone by now. And instead I said, wait a minute, instead of that success requires sacrifice. That's what my mentors taught me early on. You want to be successful in your own business. Two men that were very successful businessmen. They were multimillionaires growing up. And they both taught me the same thing. Success requires sacrifice. And I have to tell you, I bought in. And whenever I wanted to grow in my success, I had to look around for what I wanted to sacrifice because success required sacrifice. Till the sacrifices got so painful that I literally was sitting alone in a room, and it was at a Total Solution one night, and thinking about my wife and little children back home, and me being gone for the days I'm gone, and the thought of trying to grow it even more. I was in the middle of an acquisition. I was about to buy a company, and it was on the West Coast. I was in the East Coast, and what that would have meant. And I literally had to start examining my own premises, and the premise that success requires sacrifice was crippling me. And I finally decided that's a bad premise. And I adopted a new one, which said I can have it all. I said, I can actually have growing and successful businesses. I can have a legendary, because our vision for our marriage is legendary love affair.
Yep.
I can have a legendary love affair.
Mine's premier romantic and extraordinary husband.
I love that. And it's so you have to live into that vision, but you can't sacrifice and have that. In being, the father I wanted to be to my kids, etc. So then it became, we started changing things, saying, oh, okay, so now rather than saying, what do I need to sacrifice? The question became, how can I have it all?
Right.
And I said, well, if the kids were homeschooled, they could travel with us. And we can all go together to these places as a family. And that would live in Park City. And now you could live in Park City where I do now. So it's literally your premise.
Ramsey in Park City. I think they always rank at the same level on those things. Yeah.
It's the comfort of familiars. I grew up there.
You had that Italian restaurant there that's epic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, interesting. It's actually.
I know you try to get them to
wouldn't call it an Italian restaurant. But the New York Times said they had the best Italian food in New Jersey. It wasn't even an Italian restaurant.
Yeah. I just think about that like pumpkin ravioli thing.
God. They do so many, the filet mignon ravioli they do, and so many great dishes there. It was just, I just rented the place out for my birthday last week. So the point is that sacrifice has to be shrugged. My premise is, and I don't want to put my premise on other people, but I just want to give you permission. You can have it all. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's all the time. But whenever I'm faced with challenges, I'm looking for ways to have it all, not looking for something to sacrifice.
Look, when my partners died, I had 4 months where I believed sacrifice was the way I was going to preserve their legacy.
Yep.
And I 100% did not believe you could have it all. I believed it was not possible.
It was shortly, not that long after that, and you were young but not a healthy guy.
Yeah, so I'm in this whole notion of like, and then it was Carrie that we're driving and we have all the things that look like wealth. We're driving in the Bentley, which I always think is funny because we're going to my hometown of Price, where they just thought it was a weird Chrysler 300, like something wrong with it. But we're and the partners had died in a plane that we owned. Right. And, so we had all these things that looked like wealth, but I wasn't living wealthy because I was getting up in the morning, going an hour drive, doing a workout, then going to the radio show. If I was working out, not every day, but doing the radio show and then managing the firm, keeping all 42 employees after my partners died. And by the time I came home, my son was asleep and sometimes my wife was even asleep. And so that level of sacrifice, I gained 22 pounds over the 4 months. I hemorrhaged money because I wasn't willing to confront and face what was really going on because I was in sacrifice. These people are grieving. I can't ask them to do anything yet. And so I had people sitting around getting paid, not working, not because they're bad people, but because I was a bad leader at the time, believing in sacrifice. And, so all that's going on. And then I remember my wife tells me I'm, extraordinary at being on radio and running a business and all these things, and said, but I was ordinary at being a father and husband. And that's when I said, okay, I didn't get defensive because she was right. I got emotional. I was like, okay. So I decided I was going to stop traveling that hour. I was going to stop answering email. I was going to stop taking phone calls, and I was just going to spend time at home. And I was going to, if something came up, I was going to work on it, but everybody, they were big boys and girls and they could just start handling things. And so I just gained a lot of energy. I started working out a little bit. I started spending a bunch of time with my wife and son, and I was really rewarding and I was really enjoying it. And then they'd go to bed and I still had energy. So I finished off Killing Secret Cows in 30 days. It'd been 2 years and only gotten through 72 pages of writing. Wow. Before, it was like all of a sudden I had a belief and a shift that you could have it all, that you could have it all. And it wasn't because of balance. I didn't really believe that balance was possible because I'm constantly out of balance because I go for flow instead of balance. Right. And I adopted a belief of depth and harmony. So depth was being intentional and present, right? Or sorry, it's just about being present. Like depth could be, I could spend 2 minutes with someone and be so present that it could make up for 2 years. Like when my parents came to Italy years ago, that week was like 10 years. Right. Just what we accomplished from a connection standpoint and a quality. And I could think back to before I understood this in my 20s, we went on a trip to Tucson, Arizona, my wife and I, and we were there for a week, but I was closing a real estate deal and I was on the phone the whole time and we weren't there with other people she knew. So
guilty as charged, man. I've done that.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was plenty of time there, but then I could just think of like taking time out from my business to talk to my wife for 5 minutes because she's dealing with something, where when I was in my 20s, I'd be like, I'm at work. Can we talk about this later? Right. So all of a sudden that's depth. And then harmony is just being intentional and deliberate with my day, selecting what I'm doing with my time. So that, and look, in 2012 is when I really decided, and you were instrumental in this, I was just going to invest heavily in my relationship. And that paid off more than any other investment I've ever made, from quality of life, from enjoyment, from just, it was tough. It wasn't easy. From year 7 to 9, we had a mediocre marriage. I was numb at parts of it. She was numb at parts of it. She didn't trust that I would put her before other things, including my business. And in 2012, I remember saying, hey, do you need to get to the office? Are we okay? We making enough money? Like, I was going to show her my level of dedication. And that had such a richness to it, right? That it transformed my life. So I'm with you on that have it all. Yeah. Like when that philosophy came out of have it all, like it changed my actions completely.
Yeah. And I think hopefully, people, especially entrepreneurs, business owners, they have that moment of clarity. I wish I had mine a lot earlier. But I have no regrets, meaning that, you have
an appreciation for what you have.
It's just something I had to learn, and I needed to experience the pain, to get there. And I remember you making that transformation, man. You decided I'm going all in on this.
I mean, you and I were having conversations where you're like, you weren't sure we were going to make it.
No, I mean, it was.
We had never used the D word, but you're like, maybe you guys don't share the same values, you said one time.
Yeah, I think it was time to confront it. Really, and that's what it was. I think, to me, death is living mediocrity and tolerance. Basically saying I have values, but I'm going to just sacrifice those, and I just want to get through. And then everything becomes mediocre. And what a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've done this, earlier in my career, where suddenly what you're doing is, you say, oh, I've got problems in my personal life. I'm just going to put all my energy in my business. And then again, and that will work sometimes. It's the wrong kind of fuel, but it will drive a business and make it grow.
It's a good distraction.
Yeah. But then how do you don't enjoy the success? And now you're saying, right. Oh, I did this whole thing, and you just can't enjoy all that. And you use the term, which I think is very important. It's the difference between being wealthy and living wealthy. Right. And that's a big distinction.
Right. And I even make the distinction one more level. There's being rich, which is having a lot of money. And there's being wealthy, which is actually living wealthy.
Yeah.
And rich is solely the measurement of money, where wealthy would be depth in 5 different tracks. Money. Because people that say money is not important, they're usually not going to have much of it. Yeah. And I kind of feel like unless we're going to be out in the woods in a loincloth with a bow, I think it's pretty important.
Oh, it's very important.
Second is purpose.
Yeah.
That's part of wealth. Like when people lack purpose or have no purpose, there's no amount of money that's going to bring them happiness. You see this with people that inherit money and didn't earn it necessarily.
They become derelicts.
Yeah. Right. Mindset would be the third one. Because if you had all the money in the world, but you were constantly in scarcity, it wouldn't do you any good. You'd just be worried about losing it. You wouldn't, there's no enjoyment in that if that's your dominant paradigm. Then health. I mean, this is something that you've been out there in the world bringing health. And really part of my health journey was meeting you and the connections that you made and all that. And health is wealth. And then the fifth one is social.
Yeah.
Which in this podcast, we're really highlighting that: relaxation, rejuvenation, and recreation. And one of our joint mentors, more your like real mentor, I read his books and met him through you, but Nathaniel Branden's statement, right? Yeah. Which is, I wish I saw leisure as a worthwhile activity. That was his big life regret.
Yeah. Nathaniel, was my intellectual mentor, and was really blessed to spend a lot of years with him. When he was later in his life, and our mutual friend John Butcher was at John's house, and John said to him, Nathaniel, hey, you're in your 80s now. Think back. What would you tell your 50-year-old self, that you've learned now along the way? And he said many things, but probably the most profound thing is he said that I wish I had found out earlier in life that leisure is a valid human activity. And incidentally, the word choice he was the best wordsmith I've ever known. He was so precise with language. And because he didn't say leisure is a good idea, leisure is something to indulge in, he characterized it as a valid human activity. Because if you grow up in the Atlas Shrugged world and the world of Ayn Rand and that whole thing, which he did, and he literally the dedication to Atlas Shrugged, he was one of the 2 people that it was dedicated to, at least in the first print.
He signed it for me.
Yeah, mine too.
So I have that. I have an original first 10,000 copies.
Yeah, yep.
It's the blue cover, and then he signed it, and then Ayn signed it because it was one of the first 10,000 copies. Yeah,
it's awesome. And but that was all about productive. Rand's exact words: productive activity is man's noblest goal. Right, doing something productive, creating value. That's the most noble thing to do. So that's why he didn't say leisure is a good thing. He said it's a valid. So now valid meaning moral implication, valid human activity.
And look at this, we're sitting in a room filled with valid human activity, whether it's tying flies, whether it's, drinking wine, or whether it's, whiskey tastings or a pipe. I mean, as we said, some might call it vices.
Yeah.
none of it is anything I'm addicted to. I could go months without it.
Yep.
Or I could, and I'm not that 20-year-old trying to get inebriated anymore or anything like that. It's just simply a way to catalyze connection and conversation. It's a way to learn and enjoy while I'm having leisure, because I could watch a Netflix TV series and I'll do that. But that's not really rejuvenating for me at the same level as feeling like I'm, out there on the river for a minute.
Well, see, in my earlier entrepreneurial career, I went at one point 4.5 years I wasn't married, didn't have kids, I was in my 20s. So I went 4.5 years without a vacation, worked 7 days a week. And I got to tell you, I loved every minute of it. But if I took downtime, there was a guilt attached to it.
Your mind wasn't down.
Yeah,
it was attached to the business. I've been there.
Yeah, and I would feel guilty if I wasn't, if I left the office early one day, kind of a thing. So, what I understand now, what Nathaniel helped me to understand, is that my joy, my pleasure matters, and that if I am going to indulge in leisure, whatever that might look like, or for different people, it's going to be different. That's a valid. From an ethical standpoint, from a moral standpoint, it's a valid thing for me to do. So, and that's the thing. Like, so often, like, I can remember times where I would take vacations because I'm supposed to take a vacation, but I was miserable. I didn't enjoy the vacation because there was this undertone of premises in my philosophy that wouldn't allow me to enjoy it. And I hadn't acknowledged, I didn't know what the premises were. It was all unconscious to me. It took a while for me to mature and self-examine and to recognize why I couldn't enjoy things I was supposed to be enjoying. Mm-hmm. But after a period of time and this is, again, the importance of philosophy, when I started to check my premises, validate them through my epistemology, my theory of knowledge, and then get into now, okay, so here's my values based on my metaphysical view, my view of reality, my epistemological premises as far as, how I validate those views. And then ethically now, what value should I choose based on that? And once you start building your life out using philosophy as a tool in that way, suddenly now you can change, you can transform. I literally have gone through creative destruction multiple times in my life where I literally had a certain self-image, certain identity, burned it all the way down, and then had to let something new emerge. And that usually happens when you're changing your philosophy.
All right, it's time to shrug sacrifice and instead embrace love, embrace life, and really go out there and have quality of life at the forefront so you can live the best life and who you actually are.